Hello and welcome back to the Real Music Talks. Today's guest is Itay Kashti, a producer and composer from London. How you doing?
I'm very good, Daniel. Thank you.
So let's start with a bit of your sort of background and a bit more about who you are. So for people that don't know you, how would you describe yourself and your involvement in the music industry?
All right. Um, I was born and bred in Israel. Came here at the age of 27. I've been in some bands in my early 20s. Uh, coming from an indie rock background, and I was lucky enough to be given an opportunity in 2008 to work in the studio. Um, and I never took it that seriously in the beginning, but it sort of grew on me as I went along. And a few years down the line, as I saw, I kept on doing it. I kept doing it more and more. I started freelancing and branching out and working with more people. A few years down the line, I realized, this is, definitely something I should be pursuing full time, if you may. And I opened my own studio in 2016. The original Blue Room Studios in Shoreditch. And I was there for 5 years. I've worked with a few hundred artists. I've helped them with their music, arranging and recording them and mixing the tracks and generally guiding them. And also I'm composing music for various companies. So yeah, I'm composing for libraries and occasionally sync agents and publishers. So yeah, this is who I am at the moment.
So you definitely branched into a lot of different avenues. So taking it back, you mentioned you were in a band, like was there a specific instrument you started with? Like, I guess where did the musical journey start, like right from the beginning?
I mean, right from the beginning, as a child, I played some violin. Never liked it. Never really connected to classical music. But in my teens, I think I was hit by. We were the MTV generation. I'm that old. So I was hit by MTV and its impact. I think every week we would get a new sound coming out of it, and it was quite an exciting time. And I think some of the music I was hearing there, because back in the day you could actually hear some very interesting stuff on daytime television. You could open the TV and see, I don't know, artists like The Cure or Nick Cave or things like that. Just which sounds a bit like science fiction now. So I think it was quite interesting. There was a lot of diversity back then, and music was quite an exciting thing because I'm not saying it's a commodity nowadays, but it's very accessible, right? And back then you still had to make a bit more of an effort. I mean, of course you could turn your TV or your radio on and have it, but in order to be more selective, you really had to go out and choose whatever you wanted to buy and invest the time and the funds into it. So yeah, I started playing the guitar in my teens. I had to stop for cut it down because I had to do a national service for 3 years in Israel. And then when I finished that, I was so determined to make up for the lost time. I started playing in bands straight away. I had, a small arsenal of songs I've started writing in my late teens and my early 20s. And that was my sort of baggage that I kind of brought with me to begin with. And I kept building it from there, writing, composing, and collaborating with other musicians. But it was all, I don't want to say it was amateurish, but I wouldn't say it was, I can't say I swept everyone, over, because it was still very independent, shall we say it. But it was a great experience to have because it forced me to go out there and meet new people and, have a taste and see what it was like to play live shows and to make something work in real time, in a band format or in an acoustic format. So it was, I think this is where I feel like this is where I cut my teeth initially. and I did experiment with some recordings and production, but again, I never thought this would be a thing. I didn't move. I certainly didn't come to London in order to pursue that. Um, I think I was interested in that, but when I first started working in a studio, it all kind of connected because I thought, all right, I'm a good enough guitarist, I've got a sound, and I can write and I can do all sorts of things, but I'm never going to become like a bassist or pianist, but I can probably do these things in the studio with that artist because it's going to help them. I'm not aiming to become like a, performing pianist, but, I can definitely use my skills in that instrument, and on various other instruments, and it, being in the studio kind of helped me to bind it all together, if it makes sense.
Yeah, certainly makes sense. What was it about, I guess, working in the studio that finally made it click for you and you think, actually, this is what I want to do?
I think this is, I think that the element of, it was a collaboration, but it was coming from a different position. So when I was collaborating with other musicians, and there was more of a, well, I want to say democracy. I mean, it sounds like I'm a tyrant. I'm not, but it wasn't really clear who was like leading the path. And in here, it was really clear that I need to make sure the artist has, some kind of control over what is happening. And I was there to guide and assist, and I could always take a step forward or a step back depending on the needs. And I think it was quite infectious because I think I had to learn a lot. I started in 2008, and I think perhaps the first 3-4 years were quite a big learning curve for me in many aspects. But the one thing I was doing quite well was connecting with people. I had the ability to connect with people for that amount of time, for these 2-3 hour sessions, and I felt like I could give them this energy and almost like infect them with this energy, if you may, and make them feel like we're doing something great here, using whatever tools we had. I think I could really, and I felt like like we were making a lot more progress. Occasionally with bands, I felt like we were rehearsing sometimes for 6 months without anything really changing. We would be churning the same songs over and over again, and your ability to be a listener in a rehearsal space is always somewhat limited. And I felt like I could do that more in the studio, and I could develop the music more, and I could apply new methods every time. So it felt to me like it was a lot more productive, no pun intended. And yeah, so I felt like this was really something I should focus in, and I saw the response from the other end as well. I felt like people were responding to it in such a positive way. It always led things forward, I guess, if it makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I mean, obviously, you get to work with loads of different artists, and if you're in a band full time, you're not going into the studio every day, unless you're doing like a big run where you're doing an album or something. But ultimately, that's just one side of it. Whereas if it's the creative process in the studio you enjoy most, then it makes sense that you'd want to do that.
I think it's also helping you to branch out, as you said, and push yourself to different avenues. I mean, I've done all kinds of music that I never thought I would get even close to. I've made soul music and heavier stuff, and I've done a lot of acoustic, and I've done a lot of electronic and R&B, and you name it, like genres of music. I was never an active listener but I was never listening to that music in real time, but I could sort of pick up on certain elements. And again, as a producer, I could do it. Maybe as an obviously as an artist, I don't think I could do that. But I could definitely provide that as a producer. And I felt like it was really, it was far more challenging in a way that, again, I don't think, I mean, it's amazing if you can be the Foo Fighters, you can be the best rock band in the world. I mean, that's a different kind of skill, I'm not saying. But at the point of time I was at, I think I was quite excited by the prospect of doing all these different genres and sort of dipping into it. And the interesting is that, when you branch out and you expand, your limitations more and more, I feel like your center becomes more and more focused, and it becomes stronger and stronger sometimes as well. You really know what your core is, so you can really, so whenever you go back to it, it's a lot more profound.
That makes sense to me. I guess, how did you learn those skills? Was it a case of you just kept experimenting and learning on the job? Did you take a course? Did you have someone to mentor and show you what to do?
I was lucky enough when I finished the army in Israel, for all the wrongs of that country, the job center was offering a practical course in sound engineering, basic sound engineering. So I did that for a few months. And it was definitely not the same level as universities or some of the colleges in here, but it still gave you a basic vocabulary and something to work by. And we're still talking about early 2000s, so obviously you didn't have a lot of the things we have nowadays. You did have, we were I think I was learning how to work on Cubase 3, which is a bit, we didn't have all these plugins, and hardware wise you didn't have all the things you've got nowadays. Nowadays you could really afford to buy some studio classics for funny, ridiculous prices, because some companies makes models of them that are a lot more affordable, and back then it was really different. But still, it gave me a basic understanding of some of the terminology that would be used in the studio. And I kind of took it on from there. I always had a little setup, always practiced that. And my first band's EP was done partially at home, mostly at home. Me and a good friend of mine sort of, I suppose that was a part of my apprenticeship as well. I mean, we took a few months and we recorded and produced the album on our own, in our flat back then in Tel Aviv. We luckily enough didn't mix it ourselves, which made a big difference. So I had a taste of that, and I felt confident enough that at least I could record and sort of do a basic production of a band. And when I got into the studio, I knew how to record guitars, and I knew how to, and I was also, I studied, I took a lot of vocal lessons from different teachers along the years, doing my best to become a singer. Whether it succeeded or not, it's for the public to decide. But but I did have, I didn't think I did at the time, but when it came down to working with different singers, I actually always had a trick up my sleeve on how to, get that vocal better, and it was, again, very interesting. As an artist, you don't always hear yourself the same way, but I could really, really hear what these other singers were going through. So I could really provide them that cushion, that sort of help. So yeah, I could play the guitar well enough to present some ideas and basic keyboard. I could work my way around Cubase, and then I moved to Logic, and I could, work with the singer and get a good vocal take. I couldn't do much more than that, and I could also compose a melody to a lyric, or even help write a lyric. That was also important. So I had these basic building blocks, and along the years I had to develop in every time I had a new challenge, you know, I had to improve initially my abilities in other instruments like the bass and the piano, and you know, become a more wholesome guitarist, I suppose, who can cater for various genres without it sounding a bit strange. Because initially, I have a very distinctive way of playing the guitar, and I wouldn't say I forced it, but you know, I guess I had a lot of angles, you know, and it was very angular, and I had to kind of soften it and, you know, relax it a little bit and become a bit more agreeable with my playing, and, you know, not assume that an R&B song wants a shoegaze type solo, you know what I mean? So, and yeah, and I suppose I learned the technical side on the go. Well, no, what would give me the best acoustic guitar sound? What method would do that? What's the best way to record a drum kit? What's the best way to record a live band? And so forth. You know, how to mix a song, how to mix a song well, how to not mix a song. You know, there's a lot of variants of that. Yeah, it's an ever growing, ever you know, expanding process of trial and error, and yeah, it sounds like a cliche almost, but yeah, you have to learn something new every day. You know, whenever I switch my computer on, I need to learn something new, not even because I want to, but every track is like a new puzzle you need to solve, you know.
Yeah, I love the fact that it's an art form in itself, right? Like no one track is the same, and you can't necessarily apply the same approach to every track. I mean, there's basic principles, but ultimately every piece is its own work of art.
Yes, absolutely. And the problem is, you know, I'm not. It's not laziness, but I suppose my brains can sometimes work in patterns, and I think I occasionally I try to apply certain patterns, and you know, it's only when I stop that, you know, I'm not saying there's not you do develop a workflow and a method. That's one thing. But you have to mix it up a little bit when you approach a new project, because you know, as you said, no track is like the other, and just because you've done that trick worked really well in that song or in that piece, it's yeah, it might be a good basic thought for this other track, but you still have to tweak it, you know, and it takes a lot of sensitivity and occasionally time, which we don't always have that time. It's a very fast-paced, you know, world that we're in nowadays. There is this, when people pay for your time and people pay for you to do a certain job, you also want to make them feel good, so you don't always, but this is what I love about that collaboration. I know a good artist would listen carefully and come back to me with certain, you know, points, with some food for thought that maybe I didn't notice because I was too busy, you know, crafting some of the elements we can hear in the end product. So this is why it's important to always, I think, have a second ear, you know, a second pair of ears, shall I say. Not to say, I do work on my own quite a lot, but you know, I always, even if I compose by myself, it's always good to give the end product to somebody else to sort of give it a second listen and give you some feedback. You know, I think it's extremely important.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, because what happens, especially if you work on one track for a long time, you kind of become a bit numb to how it sounds, and you can almost over mix it. Whereas like if you get someone else's opinion, they see something that you might not have heard for ages, and you're like, oh, okay, I didn't think of it that way.
Absolutely. I think if you get stuck on a certain track, it's really important to just leave it aside and, you know, maybe gain a fresh perspective over it, because but really, I think it's a matter of a few months, really, where you just have to, you know, shelve it and just say, right, you know, I'm not sure about this, whether it's reached its full potential or not. I should just let it be what it is right now and come back to it if you've got the privilege to do so, it depends on the situation. I would occasionally do that when I'm composing, let's say, an album for a music library, for example, and I might have a couple of tracks that I'm unsure about or uneasy about, and as the album evolves and I sort of understand what is the basic principles that should be guiding it, I can either apply them to those tracks that were kind of on the shelf, or I just realized that, you know what, there is another element to it. A good friend of mine once told me that we all have a lot of bad music to get out of ourselves. I don't want to say bad, but not so good music that we need to release out of our system in order for the good music to come out. Which I think not enough people pay attention to that point of view. We all assume that our newest idea is always the best because this is how we get excited as artists, as musicians. But this is why it's so important to keep going and to keep creating. Even if a band or an artist supposedly they have like a set of songs they play live, like 10 songs or whatever, or 15 songs. If I was an up-and-coming artist in my early 20s nowadays, I would make sure I write as often as possible, and I would make sure I document it as often as possible. When I say document, I mean just get a basic recording, even using my phone or something. Just make sure I've got everything I can have, as much as I can have, because you never know. You can just you can never know. Sometimes you think highly of some kind of idea and it evaporates into not much at all, and sometimes really humble beginnings can go a long way. So I think it's really important to just keep at it as much as you can.
100% agree. No, some really good points there. What is it that made you want to start your own studio? Maybe do you want to talk through that process and how you found it?
When I started branching out, I didn't have a lot of money, so I couldn't really afford a studio of my own. I was lucky enough to be cool. I've collected a certain amount of equipment along the way, and at some point I realized some artist wanted to work with me privately, so I knew I needed a space. I didn't want to do this from home anymore. I thought it would be good to just get a few hours in the studio somewhere else, and I was time sharing in other studios just to get a feel for it, to see what it feels like to have that responsibility. And I think I was doing that for a year or two, and it was fine. And I think I got to a point when I said to myself, right, I could keep this up and have a certain amount of hours, or I could pay just a little bit more. I thought, right, what if I pay just a little bit more? It was right for 2016 at least, I don't know if, and I could have a studio for myself, all for myself. That I could maybe rent out some of the hours. That's what I thought. Maybe I could hire it to some other people on the weekends or something. But surely this can work out financially, because if I'm spending a few £100 anyway, I might as well, sink in another 200 and just have the place to myself. And surely, the extra wealth of time will pay it back. So I started looking. I live in East London in Hackney, so I was looking all around, and I came up to this space in Shoreditch. It was it was not very orthodox. It was below a coffee shop, and it was quite a noisy room. Actually, you could hear the tube rattling the walls every 3 minutes. So traditionally, most people wouldn't open a studio there, but I thought, what, this is actually, I felt like I could, do something there. I felt like I could make this work. I was really lucky because at the time I got in touch with my cousin, with whom I haven't spoken to in a long time, and I knew he was in the business of soundproofing rooms and building recording studios back home in Israel. So he came over and he flew over and he helped me build all these lovely panels and diffusers. You can see my cousin Guy. He did an amazing job, and yeah, and I started from there really. And I guess having a studio of my own really focused the fact that it was a business, you know. I never wanted to look at it this way, but it is also a business, you know. But I also started enjoying all the added work that I had to do at the time. Like, it was getting quite interesting to follow the numbers and see how it goes up and down occasionally. It was interesting to find new ways to market the studio and my services. I think I wasn't using social media as much in the beginning, the same way. I wasn't using mailing lists, and I was using newsletters, and it was quite interesting to experiment with all these elements, which again, as a traditional musician, they used to make me shiver when I started that, because musicians have this perception they should only be playing their instrument and writing the songs and performing it and recording it. You don't think you actually want to deal with that stuff. But I was, you know, I think I would recommend everyone to have a go at it and to see what it's like to try and, you know, learn these new skills, because everyone needs them nowadays. Whether you're a plumber or a producer or I don't know, as long as you need to make the world know about your services, it all goes down the same rabbit hole of marketing. And yeah, I think it's quite important to get a better understanding of that.
Yeah, completely agree with you. I think every person's going to need to learn that at some point. But it's good to hear that you actually kind of enjoyed that side of it too. You know, it's not all like something that you should be worried about or whatever. Like, actually, there is quite an enjoyable side to it. So it's been great chatting today. We're actually nearly out of time, but as we close out, is there anything else you'd like to leave the audience with? Any tips, advice, or closing thoughts?
I think I said it along the line. I think just keep doing whatever it is that you want to do. If you want to produce, find people and produce them and record them, even if you don't get any money in the beginning. Just do it because your mileage counts. If you want to be a writer, write every day. You don't just wait for your muse to come up, just write every day. If you want to be a singer, sing. If you want to be a tuba player, you know, and so forth. Just hone your crafts, because the 10,000 hour rule really matters in that sense. And try to enjoy the path and the, you know, because you might get somewhere someday, but if you're not enjoying your journey, yeah, then what are you doing it for really? So I hope you enjoy what you do and you keep at it.
Perfect. That was great. Thank you very much, buddy. Thanks for watching,
Thank you,
everyone.
Daniel.
See you next time.
Bye.
Take care.